Hey folks, we are a couple minutes past and I want to go ahead and get started. So this is the October 15th meeting of the working group LTS. This is a Kubernetes community meeting. It is public and recorded. The recording will go to YouTube after we are done. So please adhere to our code of conduct. The short summary of that is to be good people. We want to have an inclusive, open conversation, constructive community. So we don't have anything on the agenda other than continuing discussion of the proto-KEP document. I personally have not had time in the last little while to work on collaborative content on that. I'm not sure if anybody else has. So I guess initially I'll throw it out to comment and discussion. Have folks had additional thoughts? Have they been entered into the document? I know we have a lot of things that in prior meetings we've discussed needing built out.
Yeah, the thing
I seem to recall that
I have not
at the last meeting we decided that we needed
We have 3 people talking, I think. I'm going to pause and catch. Jordan, what did you say?
I was just going to say I haven't had a chance to look at the items assigned since the last meeting.
And Quentin, then.
Sorry, I think we decided that we needed the white paper, which provides context for the KEP. And in the absence of that, it didn't really make sense to try and finish formulating the KEP because there were a lot of questions around why and what alternatives and some of the motivations. So I think that was what we decided to do next rather than finish the KEP.
Yeah, and that's when I said sort of proto-KEP, like we had some work to do on summary motivation, just the top of the document there, yeah, as opposed to making a PR on GitHub.
I wanted to see more companies joining this meeting and providing a perspective of how they see the LTS process. I see that we only had one representative. So what is the future for Airbnb and Uber, I guess?
And so in terms of having others come and share with us how they are operating their clusters directly, we hadn't ended up having people come and as many people as we had initially hoped or thought come and give a detailed presentation on what they are doing, but we'd had folks kind of proxying information based on one-on-one conversations about that. It definitely would be better to have more.
Yeah, I think that was one of the reasons why the white paper was kind of touted as a way to document a lot of that stuff and provide a central place where people could go and say, you know, where is all this information about how other people are doing it and what their needs are.
I guess one thing that I did change a while ago was that I added some stuff about the two sort of previous options that we had submitted, one from you, Lubomir, and one from Tim Sinclair, and a little bit sort of basically in the motivation section. I haven't seen anyone comment on it, but I just wanted to sort of make sure I pointed out that because there was a couple of bits in there that I put in there that I was not, I sort of put in there as like my opinion, but I'd kind of like other people to look over it and just make sure I'm not speaking for too many people. In particular, there was a bit in there that I put in there about one of the reasons that we chose to extend by one version is that it's like the minimum viable change, and it's kind of as much a learning exercise about what's involved in changing the support window as it is about you getting like heaps and heaps and heaps of value out of the first time we change it.
That resonates for me. What about for others?
I think I expressed this opinion. We've had a few people missing over the last month or two, I guess. There might be some repetition here, but my opinion was that we should actually try and decouple the period of support from the release frequency. And I know it's a tall ask, but I don't think we want to design a long-term support or longer-term supportability plan around a fixed quarterly cadence when we're already, there are noises that that is not the correct cadence. And so I have some reservations about that. I would prefer to try and decouple the two, and I fully appreciate that this is a difficult thing to do, but if we do nothing else but prove that that's impossible, I think that in itself might be more useful than proving that we can increase it by 1, which seems small enough to not be material.
At the same time, one of our first reviewers from somebody who is not attending the meeting at all saw this document and said, there's no way, this would be too expensive, we can never do this. So it's not as immediately non-controversial as one might think.
To be clear, I was not claiming it was non-controversial. I was claiming that it might be useless, in the sense that, you know, if we can only do it by 1 repetition, even if we could do that by one, extended by 1 version, 1 release, as soon as the release cadence window changes, we no longer have annual long 1 year long support. Let's say it becomes monthly, for example, then we have to increase it by like whatever that is, 9 releases, and then we're kind of back to square one again.
So when you said inconsequential, that was from a consumption perspective, where the objection was it was majorly consequential from a production perspective. What it takes to produce a 4th release and support it for a year was stated as majorly consequential, but you're saying even if, regardless of that, it's not consequential from the consumer side, it doesn't give notable benefit.
Yes, if the release cadence increases even from quarterly to monthly, it renders that effort and achievement, even if we did manage to achieve it, essentially useless.
I'm not sure I agree that like a hypothetical future change in cadence makes extending how long we support things currently useless. Like if we were going to, like, our deprecation policies and support policies currently are phrased in terms of releases or months, whichever is greater. And so that's really intentional to make sure that we don't like play fast and loose by saying, oh, well, we have to support something for 3 releases, so now we're going to go to a daily release cadence, and congratulations, we've removed this thing in 3 days. Like the reasons we have the time periods we do is to give people long enough to make adjustments.
My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Dawal educated me on the last meeting, I think, that may be our stated goal, but in practice it's not practical given the version skews and upgrade processes required. It would be impossible for us to change our release cadence and still support things for longer than 9 months. If that's incorrect, please feel free to educate me otherwise, but that's my understanding.
The statement.
I'm not following either. I think so we're using words that are fairly strong, like impossible. I think there's a practicality here, certainly from an end user perspective, what it means to consume a change in cadence or support stream, what demands are placed on the user. And maybe there's been discussion that would be onerous to the point that people would not like it, but I don't think there's something technically impossible here.
Okay, I mean, if we think that we could do these releases that Jordan's referring to, like, faster releases and still practically support things for 9 months, then changing 9 months to 12 months seems like a very valuable thing, because there's some magic around annual, 1 year support. I was under the impression that was very difficult to the point of being impossible.
It comes down to policy and enforcement and testing to assure that we aren't violating our stated policy as well. And I would say we're weak on that front to some extent now. But it certainly, I think it still remains something that would be aspirational, because this would give a certain type of stability to end users that they, or predictability to end users that they are asking for.
Darwell, do you want to chime in? I don't know if you're able to. You're on mute. You were the one who argued quite strongly for this fairly recently.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, like, specifics of what the concerns were.
So Duffel had mentioned he's got a medical issue that's making it hard to speak today, so he may not be able to. The one thing that I recall him speaking to significantly was what the end user experience was in terms of upgrade process. So if we, even if we're not deprecating and removing things in 3 days, for example, but there have been many releases, say there have been 12 releases across the course of a year, and we've made a commitment to users to not remove things, we would still require a user to upgrade through all of those 12 versions to get to latest if they had tarried behind on the oldest of the supported releases, and that would be onerous for a user operator.
Yeah, I think it was, I'll try and paraphrase Darwell, but my understanding was that would also require 12 upgrades of all clients in existence of the Kubernetes cluster. And even if you batch those up and said, right, we want to run version X for 9 months, and then we want to spend 3 months upgrading version X to X plus 12 or whatever it is, that because we do monthly releases, that would essentially enforce 12 upgrades on all clients, including all kube controls and libraries, applications interfacing with the Kubernetes cluster.
So I think some of that is like imagining extrapolating one dimension of our current support SKU without adjusting the other supported SKUs that are the way they are today because we support 3 versions at a time. So like, you're right, today nodes have to be within 2 versions of the API server. And today a kube control client has to be within like a version plus or minus. Those windows were made to work when you had a server and nodes kind of at the ends of our support, our stated support. If we increased the number of releases we were supporting in order to stay within our 12-month or 9-month or 12-month, whatever we end up with, deprecation period, I would expect those SKUs to widen to keep the same relationship that we have today. So you could have a kubelet on the oldest supported version and an API server on the newest supported version, and we would support that.
Yeah, I understand that.
So that would keep you from having to upgrade every client and every node through 12 steps. Like, what you can do today is keep all your nodes where they are, upgrade your API server to newest, and then roll your nodes. So you do a single upgrade of your nodes. You don't have to upgrade all your nodes through 12 steps.
Okay, I think the knock-on effect, I understand that, and that makes sense. I understand that the knock-on effect of that is that no API or field or any aspect of the API would be able to be deprecated or changed for, it would have to have like a 12 release deprecation cycle. Whereas today, I think it's 2 or 3.
But again, today we say 3 releases or 9 months, whichever is greater. So I would like
Okay.
it would become, you could keep it at that. You could say 3 releases or 9 months, whichever is greater. And if we increase our cadence, then the time frame rules instead of.
So we just change 9 to 12 and we're done.
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, the devil's in the details. Like,
Sure, sure. Okay. No, I mean, that was sort of my original assumption. And that was my motivation, was that we should try and decouple the time frame from the release cadence, because
I think what I was maybe going
sounds
to ask
like we have got that, but Dawal convinced me otherwise last time.
I wanted to understand what that meant to you, because I feel like what we have documented is actually that today, as Jordan describes. It's releases or time under the expectation that either could potentially vary, but that they were related at least.
Pardon my ignorant question, but did we actually change the SKU commitments when we added the extra release to the, when
we haven't added an extra release yet.
No,
we are discussing that, and we
no, not the 12, not the 12. When we changed the fixed cycle from N-2 to N-3, like ages ago.
We haven't changed the fixed cycle to N-3.
When we release security fixes now, what do we release them for?
We release them for N-1 and N-2 with about a month slop from when a release is cut. Within the next month, the final release of the N-3 is cut, but we do not maintain N-3 through the lifetime.
So there were changes to that a year or so ago. Okay.
So I guess that was kind of what I come to roll it back to my original question. That was what I was kind of asking about with the thing, is that all of the things that we have just talked about are the things that the document currently doesn't make clear. Like that's what I meant by this is a minimum viable change, in that, in order for us to be able to decide whether or not to increase the frequency of the releases, or, do extensive changes to the support windows that are more than, just moving it out to 1 year, we need to have a better idea of what is actually involved in making a change like that. And the best way to do that is actually to make a change like that. That's why I refer to this as a minimum viable change, in that a large part of the point is to identify all the things that we are going to have to touch to mess with the support windows, both in terms of the supported SKU, in terms of the the time periods, all that sort of stuff. This is, there's so much unexplored territory here, and so much of it requires very broad coordination across the entire project, that there's so many there's so much unknown that we need to try something. And as much as I don't want to be the one just using we need to try something, this is something, therefore let's try this, that's kind of why I wanted to put that in there. And I feel like that idea feels like, to me, a really important pin to spin this whole thing around, that we're trying to, that we're doing this as, as Quentin said, there is a magic property of sort of the 12-month cycle, that it will mean that, if if you do have sucky periods for you, like retail businesses do, that they don't want to have to do upgrades at Christmas, then it's on, you can then make sure that happens. It's never going to be that your bad period will roll in and out of when you must upgrade.
I agree with the idea that, like, we have a lot of very specific policies and numbers today, and it's not clear what the relationship between those are. Like, we support 3 releases because of this month period and this cadence, and so you're right, Nick. Like, extending 1 release will make us look at all of those numbers and say, are these inherent and they will not change, or are they derived, and what's the relationship between these?
Okay.
I do think, like, there is concrete benefit for people on annual cycles, and so I think it's more than just an experiment. Like, if you look at surveys, we ran into this with some of the custom resource extension stuff, trying to figure out like what releases people are on. And there's a lot of spread over like the last 4 releases. Even though we only support 3, there's a lot of spread over 4. And it's not clear how much of that is just lag and how much of that is like people are actually putting themselves on an annual cycle and just being unsupported for a quarter because that's what they have to do. It's not clear why, but people are spread across the last 4 releases primarily.
Well, even when you go, even if you do an annual cycle, that still kind of gives you the, you know, okay, you have 1 day to not fall off continually supported. So,
And that was the gist of, so these N-2 or N-3 statements become confusing depending on what N is. And often as a developer on the project, I think we think of N as master. So -2, it would actually be -3, but really it's N as in the current supported release and the 2 supported releases prior than that. So, but often we end up with 4 streams. And then there's that tailing one, so you have all these off by 1 because it's computer science. But the idea that you've got 3 things, and if you're on one, you need 2 to get to the next one that are supported, that you're falling off the tail side. That right now that gives people 3 months to plan a change. And having a little bit more than 3 months, we've seen evidence that that's useful. And I think in all of our professional experiences, 3 months can be a tight window to affect a major change. So I see that there's benefit here. One of the other things that I was reminded of this week is Golang, their cadence is dramatically off of ours today. This change would force us to address that. Right now, one of the issues we've had on our trailing release of the 3 is that we know we're out of support from the Golang community, and we don't actively deal with that. So this would force us to do that, to be able to capture the 4th release and as supported. And I think that would be quite likely a positive change for us, because we're seeing more and more CVEs. For example, this fall we've had some Golang CVEs, and we can't address those on the 113 branch, even though it's going out of support. But we couldn't address those going back a number of months when it was still in support from our perspective.
Just at the risk of being pedantic, we keep talking about a 3rd release and a 4th release. We're actually talking about annual, a 1-year support cycle. So can I suggest that we stop talking about a 4th release and we talk about, so we have a statement today, if I understand correctly, which is that things are supported for 3 releases or 9 months, whichever is longer. And we're going to change that statement to 3 releases or 12 months, whichever is longer. And that's the essence of the change. That
the time frame, whichever is longer. So we maintain 3 releases. That is what we maintain today. Our deprecation period says you can't remove things or make breaking changes until it's been 9 months for a GA level thing, until it's been 9 months, or 3 releases, whichever is longer. So like we do the work, we run CI, we backport security fixes, like we maintain 3 releases, and that's what we maintain. We will not make breaking changes until something has been announced as deprecated for at least 9 months.
Okay.
So the deprecation stuff is the time or release.
Yeah.
Okay.
And with the quarterly release cadence, those all coincide and they're all essentially synonymous with each other. Yeah. And what we're striving to do is make them non-synonymous with each other.
So I understand your assertion there, but practically speaking, all of the engineers on the project say, well, okay, if we change that number from 9 to 12, what's the impact on me? And immediately it becomes, you have another branch that you need to support. You have a 4th branch you need to support. And
I take your point, Quentin. Like, yeah. if we say the benefit, the primary benefit is that we give a year support window, then we should say that's what we would like to do. How do we accomplish that? One way would be to slow our release cadence to 3 times a year and keep the same number of releases. Yeah. There are costs to that. Yeah. Another way is to add a 4th release. But I agree that if that's the primary benefit we're claiming, we should make that the goal and then look at costs and benefits to each approach.
Yeah. And I would like I would like the whole concept of supporting for a year or providing the ability to run stuff for a year to not be contingent on quarterly releases, because I would like people to be able to have that debate about what the right release cycle is kind of independently of this conversation, which is for different reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, how many free variables do you want? And if we commit to a support timeframe, which I think is valuable, like today, it just says, we support 3 releases, and that's usually about 9 months, which if I'm consuming something, usually about is not super comfortable for me. Like, we're downstream of Go, right? And so if Go said, well, we support 2 releases, and right now that's, you know, about a year, but who knows what we'll do next month? Like, that makes me really uncomfortable. I don't think they have any plans to change, but I would like them to say, I'd love them to say actually like longer than a year, but that's a separate issue.
And they are precise on theirs.
Is what?
They are precise on what they do today. They have a very tight calendar. It aligns poorly with us, and our, whether you call it 3 or 4 releases or 9 or 12 months, it does not align.
So I think it would be valuable to adjust our support statement to be time-based. Yeah.
Cool.
I actually have to drop it, but I will take a look at the issues assigned to me in the KEP and try to get that wrapped up.
So maybe something, Quentin, that we could do then is if we scrub the document to focus only on denoting time through the majority of it, but then have some section that's practically speaking what this would mean today, because people want to understand what their actions are, what work they're going to incur on this. This isn't just a philosophical, we will claim support. There are actual work items that come from it, and infrastructure changes and test changes. And
yeah, I think that's a good way of putting what I'm suggesting. And in fact, there's 2. So the primary support period is X months. 12 is the one that on the table, and the implications given our current quarterly release cycle are X, and should that change to something else, by implication, the ramifications would be something slightly different, or just formulate stuff in terms of a variable size or a one of the parameters is the release cadence, and that happens to be 3 months right now, and it may change, but the model should support essentially an arbitrary release cadence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that if we focus the words on that, it could change the mindsets in a way that's constructive. I think we still have to address what the release cadence, practically speaking, what the implications on individual developers are there. But then it becomes an opening for future work to say that once decoupled, that 4 releases a year, like Jordan was saying, could drop to 3, or it could increase to 6 or 12. But we could decouple that development cycle from what the user's support cycle expectations are.
Yep.
So I'm having again the developer perspective. I don't know about the other developers in the project. Maybe we should do a survey, but I would be perfectly fine if the release cadence changes so that we have 3 releases per year. Right now, it feels to me like the release cycles are very short. Like I explained a couple of meetings ago, we are pretty much battling time all the time. It's like, who is going to do this KEP? Who is going to work on this feature? Who is on PTO? Like, it's the release cycles of 3 months are very short. I know the Linux kernel is doing even faster than that, but I think we have a bit of a struggle. So maybe this survey, we can do this survey to ask the developers in Kubernetes, like, what do you think about the current cycle? And maybe, like I said, I personally am going to like this change if we do it, to have 3 releases per year. and it solves some problems. But I was interested to hear what Jordan was saying, that there are problems also with changing to 3 releases. I don't know the details around that. Maybe it's going to affect consumers downstream somehow.
I feel like the risk we're running at the moment with is that the extending. I see what you're saying, Quentin. That extending the support window for the year is, probably is one of the things. I think we all kind of agree that something like that is probably a good idea. Part of the reason that I'm kind of like, well, I'd rather us get on and do something rather than nothing, because right now we're kind of stuck a little bit in not doing anything, and because we're kind of, everybody keeps saying, but what about if we change the release, if we change the release cycle time, but what about if we change to monthly releases instead, and that's why I got the impression that the initial reason why we wanted to write this KEP was so that we can have something to show for the fact that we'd spent a whole bunch of time thinking about this for like over a year. And I worry that introducing too many other things that we can talk about just runs the risk that we're going to end up diluting the effort that we've done and not end up being able to agree on anything. And so I think it's really important for us right now to focus on the idea that, hey, the year is a magic number. We need to extend this, we need to make it so that we can support things for a year, and let's focus on what we've got to do to even issue a statement that, hey, as the working group, our recommendation is that we figure out what we've got to do to make sure that people can be supported for a year, regardless. And I see what you're saying, Quentin. I think it's a good idea to say, regardless of what the release timeframes are, we think that the year thing is valuable. And we can say right now with quarterly releases, extending to a year means adding one extra release, and this is what that entails. And if we were to change the release cadence, then here's our guesses at something that it would entail. But if we're going to, like I said before, a large part of the problem with all this is that no one really knows what changing the release cadence is going to involve, because it involves pretty much everybody on the project. And getting that, with respect to your saying about we need another survey, Lubomir, you're right, but a better way to do that is to gather that feedback, is to try and make a change and see what people say about about that change. And if we all agree that a year is probably a good idea, then I feel like we're better off spending the time and effort that we would otherwise be spending on doing another survey to attempt to do something. And at least the attempt to do something part will yield valuable data about what people actually want and how much effort they're prepared to put in.
Yeah, this survey can be informational. I do agree that we can take action in either way, but I guess I'm going to ask the question now, who is going to decide if we can, for instance, experimentally change the release cadence to 3 releases per year? Is it going to be the steering committee? Is it going to be SIG release? Who is going to decide? Can we experiment for hey, let's do this next year and experiment with it?
This was one of the hardest questions in proposing the working group initially, even, was who are the blocking stakeholders? And from my perspective, I think it kind of amounts to the whole project needing some critical mass of all of the SIGs being willing to try this. If we put this KEP forward, who is approving on it? I mean, steering kind of said they didn't view this as their job to decide versus the community, and they're typically a tie break more than a decision making. So if we have something for a proposal, I would presume, want to see the community form consensus around it or not, versus say, we shall do this as an experiment, everybody get in line. So the thinking was that we get this thing drafted far enough along that we can talk about it in concrete terms at the contributor summit next month and start trying to build consensus. Are people open to declaring this as implementable, getting into the next level details of what it looks like to actually do it?
I think that, yeah, I think the steering committee and the six should really give the power to the people and developers, which is essentially a referendum. So you give a vote to the developer community. They can say, hey, I like this idea. Let's try it out. And the referendum can take like a couple of weeks. And you are going to get a concrete decision. And if the people like this, nobody is going to object against proceeding with the experiment.
I think that practically there are a lot of problems with trying to do like a referendum of everybody, because you can't just give it a couple of weeks. You've got to give it longer than that, because you've got to allow for the fact that people are on PTO or people are unavailable for some reason. If you couple that with the fact that the current only time when the entire community is engaged is for the steering committee elections, and we get like on the order of 750 or something like that votes, like you could make a pretty fair case that that level of voting is not going to be representative. And so that, I guess the thing that I'm trying to say is that I agree that all of those things are probably valuable, but none of that can happen until we have finished up this KEP and got something out that's concrete that people can talk about. And until we've done that, then all we're doing on these calls is just bike sheeting, right? Like until we've actually got something reasonably concrete that we can point to people and be like, we've managed to agree enough between the small set of people who are actually on this call that this is a thing that we should do, and this being up to debate. But we need to issue something and say, this group of people that are currently charged with being this working group have agreed that we should do something like this, and then that's the building consensus part. And I think that probably at the end of the day, there would need to be some project-wide consensus and some sort of process for everybody officially ticking off the fact that yes, their involvement in the project, whether it's at a SIG level or an individual level, with a sign off by the steering committee or something like that, is okay with this. But I don't think we've ever done anything like that before. Even the steering committee elections are not really close. So this is all going to be completely uncharted territory. And there's going to be a lot of work put into just the mechanics of that. And so none of that is any good without having something that we can concretely say to people, this is what we want to do.
Going back a year ago to try and formulate who were the key stakeholders in establishing a charter for this group, it was practically all of them. If you look at our charter, we've got the better part of the SIGs represented. So I think for this KEP, we would end up in the same place.
Yeah, I do agree that we have to take action. This has been dragging for a very long time. Personally, like today, during this meeting, I started evaluating the 3 months option, 3 releases per year compared to the option of supporting yet another release. And to be honest with you, I really have to say that I prefer the option of extending the release cycle. I really don't want to maintain this extra release as a developer. It's just another set of people, branches. It's a complication for us. I'm going to speak for the Kubernetes maintenance. It's going to be a complication for us to support yet another release. Instead of, if we extend the release cycle, this is going to give us more freedom to work on the features, to get more time, people going on PTO. And also we don't have to maintain this extra release. We're just going to maintain this, the same number of branches we maintain right now. This is just my developer perspective. I don't want to change the cap or something like that.
Well, I think maybe that's actually, like you say, like it's freeing. If we decouple this properly to just focus on the timeline, then the next question becomes, well, how do we make this more efficient by modifying the release cadence? And efficient is a complex thing. Efficient for developers or efficient for delivering features faster to end users, because we're getting calls for both. Efficient for getting stability established versus destabilizing features. So I could imagine follow-on KEPs that focus on just the release cadence, both, and their voices asking for longer and for shorter. So we'd have kind of competing KEPs there again, and have to, as a group, as a community, the broader community, decide which direction we want to go.
Yeah. Again, I think that all of those things are contingent on us having something written down that says we want to extend the support to 12 months. Yeah, and so that's why I agree. I can see what you're saying, Lubomir, and it totally makes sense to me that would actually be a really neat way to make it 12 months without changing a bunch of stuff. That might be a really neat way to shortcut a lot of the work that would otherwise be involved. But again, it's actually, I feel like it's actually an implementation detail as far as this KEP is concerned, where the important part for this KEP is for us to say, yes, 12 months, well, actually, as Davor made clear in one of the things in the KEP, it's actually kind of 12 months plus a bit of slack space. So it's going to be a little bit more than 12 months, because you want to, then functionally there will end up being a little bit more than that. The exact amount to which we specify that the support window is 12 months, 14 months, or whatever we end up picking is probably, one of the more important things that we need to actually say in the KEP. And so, yeah, anyway, I guess I'm just trying to, make sure that we're clear on, I don't think anyone disagrees that having your product be supported for a full calendar year is not desirable. And so I think that's the thing that we all need to focus on, that we want to concentrate on the thing that everyone agrees is desirable, because that's something that we can actually all agree on, get something out and get something happening.
So maybe that's a good moment to try and shift the conversation slightly. There is one other thing that was on the agenda. It says white paper summary, and there's a link to a Google Doc. Davil and I had started, and I think this kind of came from Quentin's call in the prior meeting to have a better summary, but this also comes from us intending to give a summary at the contributor summit in a month. So we started drafting what that might look like there. So something I'd ask y'all to read through and comment on. But basically, I'm expecting that this leads to our initial presentation at the contributor summit in a month's time, highlighting what we've done, and then that there'll still be sort of an open mic BOF conversational aspect to it, but that some portion of it has got to start out with, here's what we have accomplished so far and what we're looking to bring forward, i.e. this KEP and next level KEPs on release cadence changes possibly as well.
Okay, well, I can see immediately in that doc that the little sort of summary that I did of the two the differences between Lubomir's and Tim's proposals is probably almost directly sort of pastable in there with some minor changes. So I can take that to sort of restate that and put it into that part of the sort of the summary paper. Yeah.
Tim, it is also possible if the Kubernetes release process is delayed for I don't know how many months, you can sync with the Go release. Is the Go release yearly, by the way? I don't know.
It's twice a year. It's every 6 months. So if we were to change to, that is a downside of us actually changing to 3 releases per year, is that you would not be aligned. Like you have like an alignment problem then with the Go release cycle. So that actually would not help solve that particular problem.
Yeah, that is going to degrade it even more, I guess.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, like, okay, I should move away from this topic, but Tim, if you want to discuss the Go release, we can go ahead.
Just kind of for the record, anybody following along on the video, I'm just doing a quick screen share of what their release cycle looks like. So basically they do a release end of January, beginning of February, and end of July, beginning of August every year. And so there's two 6-month cycles there. And we are releasing end of September. Well, we release September, December, March, June, basically. So we're just rotated off of them.
What is the skill? What is the difference? Sorry.
Okay, so if we go around this in a concrete term, let's say we release in let's pick our fall release. We released in December of last year. And that was 113. Am I doing my math right? 16, 15, 14, 13. Yeah, 113 should have been what was released in December of last year. It would have been on 2 releases ago's Go, 1.11. 2 months later, Go 1.12 came out. 6 months after that, now 8 months after our release, Go 1.13 came out, and 1.11 Go went out of support. So at that point, Kubernetes 1.13 has 2 months yet of support from us, and it is out of support with respect to Golang. So Golang issues a CVE in August, and it wasn't available on the fix for that CVE wasn't available on Go 1.11, which was what we're using in Kubernetes 1.13. So we were unable to patch that, yet we're still in support for 1.13, shipping our own fixes and our own CVE fixes for Kubernetes 1.13. But an end user is going to say, well, I actually want all my CVE fixes, not subsets of them, because I run in production, I care about security. So now if we add another 3 months on to our support life cycle, so instead of there just being sort of a 1 or 2 month window where we're crossing our fingers hoping we don't have critical security issues in Golang that we can't bring into our trailing most Kubernetes release, now we elongate the time in which we have our fingers crossed. And that moves from something that we could be unhappy with, yet maybe tolerate most of the time because it doesn't always go bad. We're really forced to say we've got to move our Golang forward because we can't have 4 or 5 months of time where they're shipping fixes on branches that are different than what we consume into ours.
We always have the backup option to update our older branches to a new version of Go, which is, it's risky, but if something is super critical, we can consider that.
So this is what I think this forces us to do. We have to understand how to manage that risk and we have to be testing those things earlier and having a deliberate time frame in which we go ahead and move upon proof that it works. Right now, we don't have a good way of doing testing of different Go branches relative to our branches, and we need to establish that. That's a real problem today. We experienced it this quarter where we had CVEs in Golang that were fixed by the Golang community and we could not bring them into Kubernetes 1.13 without moving Go, and we felt it was too late, too risky. We didn't have a way to test that. So we've proved that this is a problem today already.
I think it's possible to solve it, however, because when you send the PR to update Go in Kubernetes, you can technically run on demand. We don't have this right now, but we can add it to run a batch of tests that are normally not pre-submits, but you can run them on demand. So, for instance, test all the 5K nodes, scalability tests in a pre-submit.
Scalability has been one of the outliers, and I think there, especially because we've had a history of scalability issues upon changing Go, that's a critical place where we need to just grow this ability today. And a lot of our build toolchain things where we have to update and rebuild images and push those images into actual usage in CI, like that is weekly documented, weekly managed. We're finding things where we're building images, but we didn't actually get them being consumed by our own CI. So all of that stuff needs tightened up much better today. And if we have that as a tight workflow, we should be able to move the Golang much easier, and we're in a much better place. So Dhaval mentions in the chat that if we move to sort of a 12+2 perspective where we're doing an annual support cycle, but we also have this little gap to allow a migration period similar to what we have today, then every one of our releases, regardless of our cadence today, would have a period outside of support for the Golang community. So it drives home the need that instead of having this exceptional period twice a year where for a month or two we cross our fingers, we always have it. Since it's always happening, we can make sure that we're always exercising the process. We become good at it, we automate it, we have quality controls around it. We're in a much better place as a project.
I mean, the alternative is to adjust the timeline of the Kubernetes releases to better sync with the Golang release.
But then we'd have to, so imagine going that way. If we went to a 6-month cycle and we'd kind of have to go to regardless of what the release cadence is, we'd have to move to a 6-month support cycle to cause people to move before Golang went out of support.
I see. All right.
Yeah, like I don't think that there's any real good solution for that right now that doesn't involve quite a lot of effort. And I guess that's why I keep coming back to wanting to do to get the cap out, because all of these things are the sort of things that you only find once you actually say, hey, let's extend the support window length from 9 months to 12 months. All of a sudden you find all these things where, calendar cycles of various stripes, support deprecation cycles. I mean, we haven't even talked about the other dependency problems that we have, etcd and, a whole bunch of other really hard dependencies that are there too. And so the reason that we want to really focus on getting the cap out is so that we can have a discussable cap that we can give an update for, discussable cap that we can give an update for at KubeCon and say, this cap is out. Everybody needs to talk about it. It is a big deal. Please come and talk about it so that we can all make sure that we're not missing anything, when we're talking about this. But until we've got something that we can discuss, then spending too much time thinking, oh, we could solve it this way, or we could solve it that way. I agree. Like, there are heaps of ways that we can do it, but none of us have enough information at the moment to be able to make any real judgment call about which one is better, because none of us, it is humanly impossible to be across enough of the project to be able to make a fair guess at that.
Well, we're coming over the top of the hour, so I guess 2 closing asks. Another scrub on things within that KEP document. Give some looking at that summary document as well, and that summary hopefully can feed back into refining the summary in the KEP document itself. Give a look to the KEP document specifically to focusing on time frame of support, decoupled from release cadence, and separating out a segment of what we imagine this could look like pragmatically, some of the types of things that would fall out around cadence, but also then like future work, it frees us to consider these other opportunities, some future competing KEPs. So maybe we can split that out a little more, and it could make the document a little more crisp and maybe drive towards some completion there. And then we get to don our flame retardant suits and make a proposal more formally beyond that.
Yeah, agreed. Like, I mean, that's what, like, I can just see how, you know, when we drop this bomb at the contributor summit, like, you know, it's going to be a bomb. Like, you know, people are going to be, you know, like, people are going to be, oh my God, like, yeah. And
There's no surprises here, though.
Yeah.
There really aren't.
But it'll be something that people haven't considered, like, haven't thought about before. No,
Concretely, yeah.
And that's why it's important for us to have something that we can say, hey, you need to think about this concretely and think about what you would need to do in this case, and what are the best ways, and, you know, what's a good amount of work that you're going to have to do versus like a cost benefit trade-off for your subgroup of the project. Because then we can, once all the subgroups of the project have an idea about what options there are and what the cost benefits for them are, then it's possible for, you know, us as a working group to be the ones who sort of perform that initial calculation and then put it out to everybody to be like, hey, I know that that option A is not so great for SIG B, but, you know, but in aggregate across the project, it seems to be the one that's the least disruptive for the most people, if you know, if you see what I'm saying. But you can't, people aren't going to be able to prepare the information they have to be able to understand what they need to do until we can say, this is the thing we definitely want to do, and this is and here are a few options that we've thought of for how to do it. You know, further options welcomed, but, you know, the more options we have, the longer it's going to take for everyone to think about it. So, you know, and again, because this is this super broad consensus gathering, like, it's going to take a long time. And, you know, we've got to expect that it's going to take a long time to build enough consensus across the entire project to do this, you know, and that's why it's super important that we get this out before the thing. And we've got 4 weeks less, you know, like 2 meetings tops to be able to do this, right? Like, that's why we don't have enough time to really, you know, to spend too much time worrying about implementation stuff. Like, just getting this document out in 2 meetings is going to be very difficult.
Yep, we have exactly 2 meetings. And Contributor Summit will be the week after the second of those 2 meetings. Let's see what we can do. I will try to be a little more active on Slack, also nudging, try and get a little more asynchronous conversation going on outside of the meetings. Yep.
Yeah, I think it would be good. It would be good for us to talk in the upstream Slack channel a bit more as well, especially about where this is at, you know, to see that people, so that people see that this whole thing is not dead and, you know, come roaring out of nowhere. If you've been watching the channel.
All right, well, with that, we are at time. I'll make sure the video gets uploaded, and thanks for the conversation, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.